Hi, everybody. We have a special guest back. It's Chris Hedges, the Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, activist, best-selling author of 12 books. That's as many disciples as Jesus had, including his latest, The Greatest Evil is War. He previously hosted the Emmy-nominated show On Contact, but that's the establishment giving him awards, which those aren't worth anything.
No, it was just nominated, Jimmy. I lost to Steve.
Well, good then.
It was for Best Informational Host.
Oh.
Seriously.
Steve who?
Steve Harvey.
Oh, you're kidding me.
No.
Boy, that is some tough competition.
Yeah, well, I then wrote an article to make sure I'd never get nominated for an Emmy again.
Oh, boy, that's how you do it. That's how you do it. You also gave a speech making sure you'll never give a commencement speech ever again.
Yeah, it's pretty much worked.
I made some tweets that make sure I'll never get represented in Hollywood again. So I know what that feels like. You call Zionists Nazis, and that's it. You get dropped immediately. His writings and his new podcast, the Chris Hedges Report podcast, can now be found on his Substack at chrishedges.substack.com. Welcome back to the show, Chris Hedges. Great to see you as always. Now,
yeah, thanks, Jimmy.
Now, you know, the problem with you, Chris, is that you. I'm sorry to start it out like this, but the problem is that you always try to see the sunny side of things, and things are worse than you think. That's why I'm here to tell you. Things aren't going to be okay. Okay. Your latest is called The Mafia State. First, we got a mafia economy. Then we got a mafia state. We must rid ourselves of the ruling criminal class or become its victims. So, what is the difference between a mafia economy and a mafia state? Can you tell us?
Sure. A mafia economy is the big banks, Goldman Sachs. These are criminal organizations. We saw that in 2008, for which they were, of course, never held to account. They were bailed out by Obama, and everybody who got fleeced by these big financial concerns, their mortgages went under and got evicted, and their pension funds were eviscerated by 40%. We paid the price. That's a mafia state. It's one that essentially it's unfettered, unregulated capitalism. That's what private equity firms are. KKR would be a good example, which just bought my publisher, Simon & Schuster.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. Yeah, and over the years, I've easily made Simon & Schuster hundreds of thousands of dollars. And Joe Sacco and I are going to do a book on Gaza. And before they even got the proposal, they said, no, we don't want it. We don't want it. We don't want it.
So that's a mafia economy, or that's a mafia state?
No, that's a mafia economy. So, so like KKR, in the classic example, they bought up a national nursing home chain. They harvest companies. They're not like that. That's what they're, we now used to call them hedge funds, but the private equity firms buy up the property, they leverage it. This is what Trump did. It's all loans, and they make a killing. So in the case of the national nursing home chain, they bought it up, then they spun off a separate company, which had all the real estate, all the physical nursing homes themselves, and they charged the other company, which was administering the nursing homes, rent of $40,000 a month. And of course, it went bankrupt and they made a killing. That's a kind of classic example of how private equity or the mafia economy works. So we live in it's like, they force cities to sell off their utilities, their water, their sewer, their parking, everything. And the services decline, of course, and the rates get jacked up. That's a mafia economy. So there's no control, there's no regulation, and this is spelled out in Carl Polanyi's book, The Great Transformation. And as Polanyi makes clear, that eventually the mafia economy results in the mafia state, which is what we have. It's just a slicked up version of The Sopranos at this point.
I mean, so it reminds me of when I saw the movie Goodfellas, and they would go eat dinner at the restaurant and then they wouldn't pay the bill. So the guy was like, hey, maybe if I got the mafia guy to be my partner, I could get these mafia guys to pay the bill. So he became partners in the restaurant, and they would take the liquor in the front door and they would take it out the back door and sell it again. And then after the place went bankrupt, they just burned it for the insurance money.
Yeah, so there it is. That's kind of what's happening, except the whole country's being burned up.
Right. Yeah. So that's been going on for a long time, and now
that's the gift of the Democratic Party. Let's be clear.
So when Bill Clinton got in bed with when Bill Clinton got in bed with the Koch brothers in Wall Street, him and Al Gore put the shingle out and said to Wall Street, "We're in business because Ronald Reagan scared the hell out of us, and we're going to do whatever you want." The military-industrial complex, the prison-industrial I mean, at the same time, he deregulated Wall Street, which set up the biggest crash of the economy in my lifetime. He, at the same time, gutted welfare while exploding the prison population. And he wanted to kill Social Security, but thank God for Monica Lewinsky, that didn't happen, right?
Yeah. So that's a
and he also did NAFTA, which cut the legs out from underneath unions for a generation.
So 30 million American workers lost their jobs in mass layoffs, and the Democrats wonder why people are angry. I mean, I just don't know where to even go with that.
I mean, yeah, they wonder why someone like Trump. So that's the thing. I get it physically ill almost watching liberals complain about Donald Trump instead of complain about what made people desperate enough to vote for Donald Trump. Michael Moore articulated this very well in 2016, the first time, and then he just forgot it. And then he'll never speak of it again because he won't be invited on MSNBC anymore. And so he just stopped doing that, and he had Trump derangement syndrome instead of that's been the whole point of this show since it started, was how did we get here? And we got here because of Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. Of course, George Bush and Dick Cheney were horrible, but everybody knows they're horrible going in. But everybody thought Bill Clinton was a friend to the working man, and he was not. Everybody thought Barack Obama was going to be transformational change. He was a continuation of George Bush. And so,
in some ways he was worse, I want to say.
In some ways he was way worse. But let me just ask you, do you share that kind of, outrage and ire at the what led us here and the people who failed to see it?
Yeah, I mean, that's my book. I mean, you take all of the, books that I've written in the last 15 or 20 years, they've hammered home that theme, that kind of assault and that decay has a political cost, whether it's death of the liberal class, empire of illusion, days of destruction, days of revolt, America, the farewell tour, American fascists, of course, the Christian right and the war in America. That has been the persistent theme of my books. And I'm not alone. You've done it. And then other figures like Noam Chomsky did it. Ralph Nader has kind of done. Barbara Ehrenreich did that very well. Chalmers Johnson. I mean, there were a few of us, but we were just ignored. We were ignored. And what's so scary and so frightening, because fascism is always the product of a bankrupt liberalism, is with the postmortems of the Democratic Party. They've learned nothing. I just read what that odious guy, what's his name, Carville.
James Carville?
Yeah. And it's they think it's all about messaging.
Yes.
We just didn't get our messaging right. No, when you're being evicted from your house and your town, all the industry is gone and the supermarkets are boarded up and there's an opioid crisis and suicides, and you're working 70 hours a week just to survive, and you don't have health insurance, or if you do have health insurance and you get sick, you can't pay the premiums and you go into bankruptcy. That has nothing to do with messaging. That has to do with a very, very real and physical assault on the working class. I don't know what world these people live in, but it's not I think we talked about this last time. I think you called the last Democratic convention like the Stepford wives. I mean, I actually likened it to the old Stalinist Politburo. It's frightening. So there's no opposition to what's coming at all. No meaningful opposition at all. They don't stand for anything, the Democratic Party. They don't fight for anything. And we saw that with Harris's vapid, celebrity-driven, issueless campaign, where she was proud to be endorsed by Liz and Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney, who should be in prison somewhere, probably The Hague, who left office with a 13% approval rating. I mean, they just have, drifted off into some parallel universe. Not unlike the parallel universe that, some Christian fascists and MAGA supporters are in, but is just as non-reality based. Both sides are non-reality based.
So I have a little different view on the MAGA base. I come in contact with them all the time. A lot of them come to my shows. I was at that Rescue the Republic, that thing, right? And a lot of people said that was a Trump rally. Well, I was there, so it wasn't 100% Trump rally because I spoke up for, it was all, for me, I looked at it as a free speech rally because that's really important to me because, that's all I have as a comedian and as a broadcaster is the protection of the First Amendment. So I accepted their invitation to go speak, and I really wanted to hammer home the idea that if you guys really care about free speech, and they really do, I mean, Matt Taibbi was there, I know he cares, and you have to stand up for the speech that you hate. And the speech that you hate is right now the pro-Palestinian protester. And so I made that point in several different ways on stage in front of that big crowd. And there was lots of cheers. In fact, I saw people with MAGA hats holding pro-Palestinian posters and signs in their hand. And Russell from Due Dissidence interviewed a couple of them. And I'm going to have some on my show. And I just saw a poll. They just did a poll. I saw it in The Hill today. 71% of Trump voters oppose cuts to Medicaid. So I don't think that, I think that what we need to do, like we did with the H-1B visa thing, is that you raise the consciousness of the MAGA supporter to what's actually happening, and they will oppose it. I don't think they're on board for what Trump's doing in Israel, and I don't think they're on board for if they cut health care. I think that this is a chance for people like Shama Sawant to reach out to those people like Christian Smalls did on Staten Island with the first Amazon union. This is a chance, I think, because as Steve Bannon, who I had on the show, and he said, you can't take a meat cleaver to Medicaid because there's a lot of MAGA people that are on Medicaid. There's like 80 million people in America on Medicaid, most of them children, disabled, and or elderly. So what do you say to that?
Well, I would say you're right about I'm talking more about the Christian right, which I wrote a book on.
You really have a hard-on for those Christians.
Yeah, I know.
For a guy who went to divinity school.
Yeah, I went to a divinity school that turns everyone into atheists, though. Harvard.
You're not an atheist, though. You're a Christian, aren't you?
No, I am.
You believe in a deity and a greater power?
Well, I don't know. Do we really want to do a show on this? I tried that with Russell Brand. It didn't really go real well.
Oh, I didn't see that. I wish I would have saw that. Oh, son of a gun. Well, I quit smoking pot, Chris, just on a personal note. And everybody makes people sad when I say that on stage. If I say I quit drinking, they cheer. But if I say I quit smoking pot, they're like, oh, why? And I said, I don't know why. And I think it came from a higher force or a higher power, because what it's given me is I realize that, there is no death. Life has no opposite. Death is the opposite of birth, and that I'm an everlasting, eternal soul, and that I do have a higher power, and that my ego needs to be in service of it. So
no, I would agree with that. But I mean, in times of the literalness of the Bible or heaven, hell, all of that stuff.
It's all metaphors. Those are all metaphors.
Yeah, they're metaphors. But we won't do a sermon today. So where were we? MAGA. So the Christian right, these people are definitely checked out of a reality-based world. They're all waiting for the rapture, which they will float upwards naked, by the way, into heaven. That's not even in the Bible. And they're fervent Zionists. They're also anti-Semites, but they're Christian Zionists. they believe that human beings. Well, I went to the Creationist Museum in Peterborough, Kentucky.
I went there too.
The diorama with the T-Rex.
Yes.
And Adam and Eve are riding. I think they had a saddle on it or something.
Yes.
And the guide was saying, well, because T-Rex has really big teeth, so why didn't he just eat Adam and Eve when he was hungry? And the guide said, well, because everybody loved each other, the dinosaurs loved the people, everything like this. And the guide said T-Rex had big teeth because the T-Rex opened the coconuts for Adam and Eve to eat.
So, but do you think that that's the majority of Christians? You would say that's a minority of Christians, or is it?
No, it's tens of millions of Americans. It's the most ideologically radical or militant base of the MAGA movement. I mean, the connecting tissue on January 6th were, this kind of Christian fundamentalism. But no, I think you're right. I think a lot of people voted because they just, the anger towards the Democratic Party is not just one of not addressing their needs. And just to go back, by the way, to Bannon's comment about a meat cleaver, never forget they took a meat cleaver to welfare. I mean, they've taken meat cleavers to stuff people like. Before, 70% of the original recipients on welfare were children.
I know. Bill Clinton did that.
Bill Clinton did that. So, I mean, they, Elon Musk and the other Peter Thiel, and these people don't give a damn about, what the MAGA base care. I mean, I think that a lot of these people are going to get betrayed. I think you're right. First of all, I interview them. All of my books are reported. When I was out doing America, the Farewell Tour, I was in Anderson, Indiana, where all the old GM plants were. They all voted for Trump. So yes, I think you're right. Social Security, they don't want to see it go. But I think at this point, those people that are around Trump, it's completely transactional. Melania, I just read an article about Melania. What did Jeff Bezos? I mean, boy, Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg certainly just exposed the fact that they don't have neither an integrity or probably even a soul at all. They couldn't mouth those liberal DEI platitudes fast enough and drop them fast enough. And then Bezos has now eviscerated the opinion page of the Washington Post. He's largely destroyed the Post anyway. This billionaire class is unleashed. And I think that you're right. I think there will be a backlash, and I think that backlash will come from many people who, out of desperation, and an understandable desperation, out of even anger and an understandable anger, hope that Trump would ameliorate the tremendous suffering that many, many Americans are undergoing. And, I've said it many times, but, half of my family comes from rural Maine. So that's not an abstraction for me.
Yeah, and they're mostly jerks. But
in Maine, that's all right, Jimmy. They don't like anybody who's not Protestant, white, and from Mechanic Falls, Maine. They actually have this. They're all vets. They're all hunters. My grandfather. The people they hated most in the world, for some reason, were from Boston. I don't know why, but it was the evilest city on the planet. I don't know why. I think because on hunting season, these guys would come up from Boston, and they didn't know one end of a 30-30 from another, and they'd drink and go out in the woods and shoot each other or something.
So I thought, just to double back on a point you made, I thought the glue that held the January 6th protesters together was the FBI plants, because that was a psyop from start to finish. And they had people dressed as MAGA supporters inside the Capitol before it ever started. And it was a giant protest, and only a handful of people went in, and only a handful of those people were violent. So, I mean, those are the people that respect the cops.
Actually, I wrote a column about it, and I interviewed their lawyer, and I said, look, most of these people, at best, can be charged only with trespassing.
Right.
And they're getting these draconian sentences. It was really...
did you see the videotape of Nancy Pelosi? So the whole point of that was because they were afraid that they couldn't beat Donald Trump at the ballot box again, and they wanted to make sure he could never run again. And so they wanted to get him on an insurrection, inciting an insurrection. And what they wanted to do was get them to trespass on federal property. And there's a videotape, an underground videotape that most people have not seen, that she's saying we got them. We've got them. They're now. They're now. Have you seen that?
No.
Yeah.
I mean, Nancy Pelosi is.
Yes.
And she's.
So that was a setup. That was 100% set up. I mean, if you talk to the insider whistleblowers, even the Capitol Police Chief said it was. So it was 100% set up, and so I have sympathy for those people because they were just protesting an election they thought were stolen from them, just like the other half of the country protested because they thought that Vladimir Putin stole an election from them, right? And they just annulled an election in Romania for that same. So the fascism from the left is brazen, and it's more insidious because people don't see it. People see the fascism from the right.
Sure, but the party of censorship and the party of war is the Democratic Party. I mean, Taibbi with Twitter files. I wish Matt had done, also the shadow banning and all that kind of stuff for those of us who speak out about Palestine, because I'm sure that was also pronounced on behalf of the Zionists. But it's a completely. I don't. This has been my position for a long time. I worked for Ralph Nader. I don't think that the Democratic Party is reformable. Shama Sawan and I actually pushed Bernie Sanders the first time he ran to run as an independent pretty hard. Shama was really pushing hard. And Bernie told us, I don't want to end up like Nader, which means I don't want to be kicked out. I don't want to lose my Senate seat in Vermont where the Democrats don't run against me. I don't want to lose my seniority where they'll put me on a committee. I will. 1996, Bernie Sanders was campaigning for Clinton. That was after NAFTA.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and so for me, that was Bernie saying, I don't want to damage my career. And look at AOC and the squad. I mean, it's just, I don't think the Democratic Party taints and corrupts anybody who begins or initially begins to espouse progressive views. I mean, turning his political revolution into a campaign for Hillary Clinton, which, by the way, he couldn't draw any crowds. I mean, he would draw 10,000 people, and then when that started, he was lucky to get 50 people in a room.
You're not exaggerating, by the way. I know. Was that some people who were at a rally when he was rallying for Hillary Clinton, meaning Bernie Sanders, in Iowa after he'd endorsed her, there was barely 100 people in that room. And I was there just a few months earlier, and you couldn't get inside the room. Yeah. There were there's lines outside the building. Anyway, Bernie Sanders is the biggest political disappointment of my life. I guess, I projected a lot onto him, as Carl Jung says. I projected all these things onto him. And boy, oh boy, he's not any of those things. In fact, I think it's more insidious. I think we would be better off without people like Bernie Sanders and people like AOC in the Congress, because I think you said, I'm probably quoting you, that it gives people the false idea that there's somebody inside the Congress fighting for them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's why the Democratic Party allows them to exist.
That's right.
Every election cycle, it's the same old story. Like sites like Common Dreams, for instance, will print my columns. As soon as the election cycle stops, I don't appear. Because I'm hammering the system, I'm hammering the Dem. Then I'll reappear magically after the election. So, it's.
My last big hope for the Democratic Party was a thing called Force the Vote. I don't know how familiar you are.
Yeah, you did that. That was a great idea, but that requires political courage, and that's something that they don't have, including the squad, of course.
Boy, they came out. I got it from all. I know what it feels like now. They got it, man. It was worse than when I debunked Russiagate. It was worse than that. I mean, I had most of my friends in Hollywood stop talking to me when I wouldn't endorse Hillary Clinton. And from the executive producers of Modern Family to, open micers, they all turned their back on me. And my whole thing was, why don't you want to make her come get your vote? Why wouldn't you want to have she's supposed to come get our vote? And they're like, no, like for some reason, people who vote Democrat think it's their duty. Like they let down the politician that she didn't win. They let Hillary down somehow as she didn't win. But that was it for me, was Forced to Vote. So did you have any hope for that? Because I actually thought it would work.
No, I didn't think it would work, but I was glad you tried it.
Oh, okay.
I've not voted for a Democrat since 2000. Even with Obama. So Kucinich gave me Obama's 2-year voting record in the Senate. He said, you better read this. And it was just one corporate giveaway after another. And as Dennis said, this is the scorecard. I'm making fun of Dennis, but this is the scorecard. And he said, don't get fooled by everything else. Well, thank God he gave that to me. So, boy, I was like trying to get this information across and being booed off of stages in Berkeley.
Well, that's what they'll do. Yeah, I felt for it, just like I felt for COVID at the beginning. I felt for Barack Obama. I so wanted him to be everything he pretended to be, and then very quickly it was clear he was not. And I still, for some unknown reason, voted for him in 2012. Yeah, he was. It was horrible. The Occupy Wall. For instance, I thought he was serious when he said that he was going to give us a healthcare plan, and he wouldn't sign one that didn't have a public option. That was his pledge. And here we are, I don't know, for 17 years, almost 2 decades later, and we still don't have a public option. But Joe Biden said that was his alternative to Bernie's Medicare for All, and then the Democrats never brought it up again. Not one time. Did Bernie bring it up, or the squad bring it up? Commentators, Democracy Now? Nope, nobody brought up the public option after Joe Biden got elected. Wasn't that kind of shocking?
Yeah, but there were all sorts of promises that Biden made, raising the minimum wage. Yeah. I mean, a lot of promises that didn't come to pass. And let's go back to Obama. Obama killed the public option.
Yes.
The White House killed it. And then he got all these NGOs, which had been fighting for the public option, to say, well, we got to get behind Obamacare, which was shoving a defective product down our throats, because we got to get Barack reelected. We can't damage his presidency. I mean, they sold us out too. I mean, let's not forget, all these NGOs have been co-opted largely, including environmental groups, by the Democratic Party and by the fossil fuel industry and everything else. The whole system is pretty rotten.
Yeah, let me just read a little bit from your article, and because I like how you end it. It's really great. But you say America is a full-blown kleptocracy. The demolition of the social and political structure begun long before Trump makes a few very, very rich and immiserates everyone else. Mafia capitalism always leads to a mafia state. The 2 ruling parties gave us the first. Now we get the second. It's not only our wealth that is being taken from us, but our liberty. I think that happened a long time ago too. But since the election of Donald Trump, Elon Musk, currently worth $394 billion, saw his wealth increase by $170 billion. Mark Zuckerberg, worth $254 billion, saw his net worth increase by nearly $41 billion. You know what? He just bought a yacht that's 430 feet. That's 130 feet longer than a football field. But Jeff Bezos' yacht is 450. So his is 20 feet shorter because, Mark Zuckerberg is a man of the people. So those are, you say, tidy sums for kneeling before Moloch. We have at the same time wiped out 90% of the large fish such as cod, sharks, halibut, grouper, tuna, swordfish, and marlin, and degraded or destroyed 2/3 of the mature tropical forests, the lungs of the planet. But the planet is actually, first of all, I like sushi, and then I try to block this out, this part when I eat it, that we're overfishing the oceans, but we are doing that. But I saw a thing, Chris, in 2017, NASA released a study that said because of the rise of carbon in the atmosphere, that there has been a greening of the planet. Are you familiar with that? That the fact the planet is greened by over the size, there's more greenery now than there was 20 years ago by the size of the United States. Like, that's how much more greenery. So anyway.
But Jimmy, the 2 kind of lungs and watersheds of the planet, the boreal forest, or the boreal forest because it wraps all the way around the globe, and the rainforests are being destroyed.
Yeah, that's true. And isn't it funny that when I saw Bill Gates, he was asked at a conference, should we plant more trees? And he said no. He said no. He said, "Are we going to be the people, the science people, or not?" I'm like, "What?" He's got so I don't know if he's invested in a tree cutting business, or I don't know, or if he's going to invent fake trees in a lab, or I don't know what his scam is, but he always is running one. So, did you see when he said that?
No, but Gates it's again completely transactional. So
Yes.
In terms of his medication policies and everything, it's all about making money. I mean, these people, you wonder when they have that much money why they need more, but it's a kind of disease. I went as a scholarship kid. I went to boarding school with a lot of these uber rich, the Mellons and all that other Rockefellers went to my prep school. Yeah, it's like they never have enough. It doesn't matter how much they have.
Yeah.
But there's something pathological about that vast accumulation of wealth, which we won't get off on Gates, but that's totally what Gates is about. So he just hasn't figured out a way to sell us trees. That's all.
That's it. You're right. Yes. So lack of access to safe drinking water. And man, it's amazing how bad the water is in America. People, I used to think, anyway, and the resultant spread of infectious diseases that kills at least 1.4 million people annually. Hey, so what do you think then? So what is your take then on RFK? Because his whole thing was taking on big pharma, so to the point where people think he's a kook, even though in 2008, Barack Obama was considering him to be the head of the EPA. He was such an environmental champion. He cleaned up the Hudson and he sued all the chemical company. He won. He sued big pharma and he won, and he lost his reputation for it. But now his whole thing is cleaning up the water supply, the food supply, and getting corruption. What did you see any hope there?
Well, it's an admirable goal. I mean, you're right about water. And of course, all these poor kids who have lead poisoning in cities like Detroit from the water. So he's right about that. And you're right. He was a very courageous and successful environmental lawyer. And Big Pharma is a monster. They buy patents and then jack the price up by 1,000%. They, of course, are shoving all sorts of drugs. I mean, we know that when they get a new drug, they'll just invent a disease to sell it to us. You can go on CNN. I mean, I don't watch CNN, but I put it on in the car because I love the commercials. It's all for like people going bankrupt or people who need some kind of drug I've never heard of for some kind of disease I've never heard of that has like all sorts of side effects right up to, approaching mortality. So yeah, big pharma's. I have no trust or sympathy for big pharma. That's part of the whole for-profit healthcare system, which is extractive. I mean, it's awful.
So let's skip ahead a little bit. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is well above the 350 parts per million. That was considered to be the breaking point, but we've been past that for a long time.
That's right.
And the people who used to tell me about that, like John Kerry and Barack Obama and Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg, they keep buying beachfront property, and they keep flying around the world in private jets, and so it's hard for me. I'm questioning it now. I was a diehard climate change guy, and after Russiagate, after the Ukraine war, after the Syrian gas attacks, and especially after COVID, which was the biggest, I can't say what it was, pulled on America and the world, a virus created by our own government, funded by our own tax dollars, and then, which it wasn't, I don't want to get into it, but I question it. Am I crazy to question the climate? Right, because I see how all the medical journals are now infected with big pharma money, so they suppress. Look what they did to ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, miracle drugs. And they made them sound like they were poison and horse paste and fish tank cleaner. And meanwhile, they're saving billions of lives every day, safer than Tylenol. So I see how, I got into it with the editor of the British Medical Journal, and I exposed him for being under the thumb of Big Pharma. It wasn't hard to do because I was able to do it. I'm not a genius. So after I saw how absolutely corrupt the medical system is from top to bottom, to where they can intimidate my local doctor and my local pharmacy. I don't. I'm quite, put it this way. I'm at least questioning. I know the people who scream the loudest about climate change don't believe it. So what do you say? Are you skeptical at all?
I do worry about climate change, but I'm with you on Russiagate, obviously. I mean, that's how I lost my job at the website Truth Dig, both Bob Scheer and I, because we challenged that fictitious narrative that Trump was a Russian asset and all this kind of stuff. And so all the well-heeled friends in Malibu and
yep.
Not Malibu. Is it Malibu? Is that in California?
Yes,
all the rich,
that's it.
Yeah, Malibu at her little club. Didn't like her anymore. So we were gone. The publisher. No, I'm with you on all that. But on climate change, yeah, I worry. But you're also right that everything's been bought off. I mean, you have, look, I live not far from Princeton University, and you have BP funding the climate science. And so what are they doing? They're doing junk science. They're doing geoengineering and all. So you're right. This big money has infected the pharmaceutical industry, the health industry, everything. And all these environmental groups have been bought off too.
Yes.
So I'll get on into animal agriculture, but agriculture is as pernicious a contributor to global warming as the fossil fuel industry. But big ag, buys it up. You can't. I'm a vegan because of that. That's. So yeah, you're right. The whole system is essentially dominated by these corporate oligarchic interests that and their interests are not our interests.
So you talk about the followers of this movement deferred to a leader they believe has been anointed by God. They embrace the illusion that the righteous will be saved, floating naked upwards into heaven, which isn't a bad way to float to heaven, at the end of time, and the secularists they despise will perish. This retreat into magical thinking, which is the foundation of all totalitarian movements, explains their suffering. It helps them cope with despair and anxiety. It gives them the illusion of security. It also ensures retribution against the long list of enemies: liberals, intellectuals, gays, immigrants, the deep state, blamed for their economic and social misery. Some of those people actually deserve it, though. You say Karl Polanyi am I pronouncing that correctly? Polanyi? Polanyi, in The Great Transformation, writes that once a society surrenders to the dictates of the market, once its mafia economy becomes a mafia state, once it succumbs to what he calls the ravages of this satanic mill, it inevitably leads to the demolition of society. The mafia state cannot be reformed. We must organize to break our chains one by one, to use the power of the strike to cripple the state machinery. We must embrace a militant radicalism, one that offers a new vision and a new social structure. We must hold fast to moral imperatives. We must forgive mortgages and student debt, institute universal health care, and break up monopolies like BlackRock. We must raise the minimum wage and end the squandering of resources and funds to sustain the empire and the war industry. We must establish a nationwide jobs program to rebuild the country's collapsing infrastructure. As long as that jobs program doesn't come with imprisoning the Japanese like it did the first time. We must nationalize the banks, pharmaceutical corporations, military contractors, and transportation, and embrace environmentally sustainable energy sources. None of this will happen until we resist. And so I agree that the future and the hope is what you're talking about there, and what Shama talks about, workers uniting across, but it's got to be a class movement. It has to have a class critique.
That's right.
And it can't start with LGBTQ, and it can't start with white supremacy, and it has to just be class, right? Am I wrong about this?
That's right. Yeah, and that's why I was with Shama this weekend in Workers Strike Back meeting she had in Seattle, because she embraces that, and so do I. I remember once talking to Ralph Nader, and he said, look, who cares whether they support Trump or they don't support Trump? If you're trying to organize a union for a Walmart, He said, that's what we've got to do. We've got to organize unions to confront Walmart and Amazon. And of course, we're going to, if especially in Walmarts and probably in Amazon distribution centers as well, you're going to run into a lot of Trump supporters. But the point is to challenge the real centers of power, which are corporate or oligarchic. And that in and of itself, these are Nader's words, is an educational process, because when these centers of powers react, they teach you who has power and what the cost of confronting power is. But yes, I know you've long said this, Jimmy. I'm in total agreement. This is where Sharma's coming from. It's also something I've always said. These woke campaigns, this kind of virtue signaling has just been an effective way to sever us, in particular from the white working class. And that, whose interest does that serve? Ask yourself.
That's right. Who benefits? And I was also educated on this by Christian Parente when he told me that this isn't, this stuff didn't start 5 minutes ago, 5 years ago, or 20 years ago, that this started immediately after World War II, when the deep state got in bed with the NGOs like the Rockefeller Foundation and the Ford Foundation, and they pushed identity politics. And whenever there was a class movement, that they always tried to sabotage that. Right? They didn't kill Martin Luther King because he integrated the lunch counters, right? That they all made money off of that, and they're never. But when he did a poor people's march on Washington D.C., he didn't do a black people's march. He did a poor people's march. Same thing with Malcolm X. He realized it wasn't black white. Same thing with Fred Hampton. So I'm with this. So that's why I like. So a lot of times people have criticized you for being a doomsayer, right? But what you're doing is you're accurately identifying the problem, but you are often criticized because you wouldn't give people a solution. Well, there it is. So there's the solution. You got the solution, and people need that. I've been preaching this everywhere I go, on stage, off stage, on my show, that we need to come together. My neighbor is not my enemy. My neighbor is suffering under the same oligarchy that I'm suffering under, and we have a common enemy. And we need to come together to fight that common enemy.
Yeah, well, so at the end of my book, American Fascists, I write that, because I went there with a liberal bias, towards these people. But when I heard their stories of dislocation, evictions, sexual, domestic abuse, substance abuse, you'd have to be heartless not to feel for them and the train wreck of their lives that many of them endured. And at the end of the book, I said, look, you're not going to argue these people out of their magical thinking, because it's the only thing they have left to cope with a world that has been unremittently hostile towards their existence. You have to reintegrate them economically into the society, give them a sense of stability, give them a sense of worth, give them enough of an income where they can have dignity and a sense of meritocracy. And I said, short of that, the movement will only expand and grow. So it's always rooted in that economic issue, and why we have to recover the language of class war. And I think people, you're right that they criticize me, but I've been saying this for a really long time. But that's the thing they don't want to hear, because every election cycle they get seduced by the giant propaganda machine, and they have to vote for Barack Obama or Kamala Harris or whoever it is who is within that dead system, that dead zone, that really is not only not going to assist them, but is their enemy. And these people are not, the Democratic Party leadership is not a friend of the working class. The Republican Party isn't either, but neither is the Democrats. They sold us out in the worst way. We should have walked out on the Democratic Party in 1994 with NAFTA. We should have turned our backs on them.
100%, yes. But Bill Clinton was, and the media was on his side on that. So that's the problem. And so places like your show, this show, Glenn Greenwald, we're the antidote to that media. And that's why they try to suppress us. And you've been deplatformed plenty. And, we always have to look over our shoulders for debanking. And so before I let you go, I want to show you. I don't want to. I try not to have heroes because your heroes will always let you down, right? And then that hurts. But I did it with Bernie Sanders, and but so Glenn Greenwald's always been, you and Glenn have always been in that realm for me. And I was watching Glenn. He did this segment in response to something that you had written, and I wanted to show it to you because here are my two people I admire greatly having different opinions on this, and I want to get your opinion on what he had to say. So it's about 4 minutes, and we'll listen to it.
Okay. Quote, "Hi, Glenn. It's fascinating to watch the success of Doge, what's being exposed with U.S. aid, etc., and two of Trump's most controversial picks, Tulsi and RFK, being confirmed. It does seem like we're headed for some sort of renaissance or course correction long overdue. I'm curious about your take on Chris Hedges' recent remarks about the empire self-destructing, which is the alternate way of viewing these events. Here is his first paragraph. Quote, the billionaires, Christian fascists, grifters, psychopaths, imbeciles, narcissists, and deviants who have seized control of Congress, the White House, and the courts are cannibalizing the machinery of the state. These are self-inflicted wounds characteristic of all late empires, which will cripple and destroy the tentacles of power. And then, like a house of cards, the empire will collapse." I do, without all of that invective that he put there, and I'm not sure why that's there, just leaving that question to the side for the moment, I do think that a lot of what's happening is through necessity. The reality is that this American empire is unsustainable. I'm not somebody who thinks the minute the United States government has a deficit or even debt, that's kind of apocalyptic. It is not the same, and I've never accepted the analogy that just like a family has to balance their budget, so too do governments. Governments can use debt financing and have for lots of different reasons, but that doesn't mean there aren't limits on them. And if you look at the debt of the United States and what is required to be serviced, just the interest payments alone, and then you lay on top of that the trillions and trillions of dollars that we've spent on foreign wars all over the place, it is obvious that needs to be reined in. Even if you're morally supportive of it, even if you think it's strategically advantageous, it's simply not sustainable. The United States cannot continue to sustain the level of debt that it has and the policies that generate that. So I think a lot of what Trump is reacting to and a lot of what Elon Musk is doing is almost an inevitable recognition that there has to be a radical course correction. But at the same time, I think it's an important course correction. I do not think that American empire has been good for the world. And often the argument is, well, even if it wasn't good for the world, the alternatives would be worse. We don't have to live under a single superpower or a single empire. In fact, most of world history has not been a unipolar world. There is a benefit from balancing powers. And yes, that was tried in the 18th and 19th century, and it often produced wars, this idea that we were going to have a balance of powers and no one would be dominant. But it just simply is the fact that if you look at how many wars the United States has started, how many of the wars the United States has fueled, how many of the wars the United States has fought, how many of the proxy wars the United States fuels, so much of the world's violence emanates from the United States. And there have been empires in the past that would use wars to use it as conquest, take land, take assets, and for a while that can be fed, but ultimately even those empires collapse because it just becomes so sprawling and so unmanageable. And so I think that part of what is happening is this late stage empire that Trump is reacting to, and the recognition that most people in Washington have, but have been unwilling or afraid to express, that this cannot be sustained for much longer, that this needs to all be reined in. But I also think in the case of Trump, there is a real ideological conviction that most of what the United States does in the world when it comes to interfering in foreign countries, trying to control foreign countries, trying to start wars, is very bad for the United States, very bad for American citizens. I believe there's an ideological conviction there. And if you're on the left and you believe that impulse comes from a more paleo-conservative or right-wing or isolationist impulse, maybe you can find it disturbing, even if you think a left-wing version of that would be good. I guess if you're really intent on not just demanding radical change, but demanding it in exactly the way that you want it, based on the exact premises that you want it. I don't really have that demand. I want to see the National Endowment for Democracy defunded and shut down. I want to see the CIA and the NSA and the FBI severely limited in the role that they play in the world. I want to see U.S. foreign policy far more oriented toward getting along with other countries rather than dominating them and manipulating them and exploiting them. I want to see the military-industrial complex radically reduced so that it doesn't have an incentive as its only profit and power mechanism to constantly start and fuel wars. And whether this comes from this kind of an ideological perspective or that is far less important to me than the fact that it happened. And so when I see it happening, I'm going to be encouraged by it. I'm going to applaud it. I don't have a need to call the people doing it deviants or psychopaths or whatever. In fact, the first thing that we saw from Donald Trump was the imposition of a ceasefire that ended, at least for some time, the single worst expression of state violence I've seen in my lifetime, which is the absolutely nauseating, complete destruction of the society of Gaza and the lives of 2.2 million people by Israel, funded by the United States. That came to an end because of Donald Trump. You want to call people psychopaths and deviants and monsters? Call the people who funded those things, which are Democrats and the Biden administration. And certainly they didn't have opposition from the Republicans, but they were still the ones who did it and who stood up every day and defended it and financed it. And to me, the way that you judge a person is by the outcomes they produce. And so far, the primary outcome that Donald Trump has produced has been that ceasefire in Gaza, along with a serious attempt to end the war in Ukraine, what has put the United States on a path to clearly resolving that war sooner rather than later. And then at the same time, expressing a worldview that I think is very healthy and long overdue about the way in which the United States has tried to bully the world. Elon Musk said that the United States has been bullying the world, has been interfering in other countries, and we should start minding our own business. So whatever you think of the people who are doing it, and whatever you think of their motives, or whatever you think of the impulses that are driving it, seeing these things being done and hearing these things being said are things that I regard as extremely positive. And all along, from the very beginning, when I was far less negative about Trump and the emergence of Trump and the Trump movement than most people were who had been associated with the left, the reason for that is that I could hear and see this realignment. And so could neocons. Neocons left the Trump movement, were petrified. It did everything to sabotage it because they understood what I understood as well, which is that their project was endangered by a Trump-led Republican Party. And it was for exactly that reason, the reason that neocons hated him, that I found potential value in Trump and in the Trump movement and in the realignment that he could usher in, knowing that the Democratic Party would never deliver any of those things, that reforming the Democratic Party or trying to work within it or whatever was a fool's game. That was something I believed for a while and then saw the futility of it for so many reasons. And then with the emergence of Trump, it got even worse because they became defenders of establishment dogma and institutions of authority. And so all the things that made the Democratic Party irrevocably rotted intensified a great deal. And I think you're seeing the wisdom of that view being vindicated in just the first weeks of the Trump administration.
So go ahead. I mean, I share a lot of what he said. Like the fact that the neocons were against Trump made me pique my interest, and they're against Tulsi, they're against Cash, they're against RFK, and so what would you like to say?
Well, I mean, first of all, I know Glenn and have deep respect for him and have for a long time. I think he didn't. I think he just read the first paragraph of my article. That he kind of misrepresented what that article was about. And what it was about was, in late empire, those who assume power essentially cannibalize the empire for their own benefit and essentially destroy the mechanism of empire. But everything about empire that he said, I agree with and have said and written for many, many years. I worked on the outer reaches of empire and many of its wars, and understand its viciousness and its cruelty and its racism. Empire, the outer reaches of empire, empire itself is the external expression of white supremacy. It's always racist. Iraq, I mean, I was in Iraq. I mean, the way that U.S. soldiers referred to Iraqis, sand and the N-word and Haji. I mean, it was so, I don't disagree, but I think he missed the point. And I talked specifically about AID. AID, like many NGOs, became weaponized by the empire. And so the National Endowment of Democracy became a way, one of the interesting things is that these tools were used to bring down Jeremy Corbyn. If you look closely, they fund any group that is against a government that expresses any kind of autonomy. They use aid as a weapon. So for instance, in Haiti, they helped rebuild the airport in Port-au-Prince, but the quid pro quo was Haiti would vote to keep Cuba out of the Organization of American States. I mean, it's always weaponized. I saw it overseas. Groups like AID essentially do in a public way what the CIA used to do in a covert way. And by destroying AID, they don't actually understand one of the fundamental tools that empire uses. So you use aid as a way to reward people and support people who are compliant and surrender to the dictates of empire and punish people who oppose it. That's why Evo Morales threw AID out of Bolivia. So the point was that these people like Musk, they don't actually understand how empire works. I hate empire. To the core. I covered the wars in Salvador and Guatemala and Nicaragua. I've seen it up close. And I think Glenn just misrepresented. I'm going to hold with the fact that they're deviants and all that kind of stuff. I think the moral rot is pretty high, as it is in the Democratic Party. Hunter Biden, and I think everybody is essentially, morally bankrupt on both sides. That was the point that I was trying to make, that they don't know how to manage, because are they going to close the 800 military bases? Trump loves power. I doubt it. And the Republicans right now are trying to push through a bill where will increase military spending by $100 billion over the next 10 years. So the point is they don't know how to manage empire. It's not that, and I would disagree on this one point with Glenn in terms of intent. I mean, Glenn's position, your position, my position is, let's bring the empire down. It's no good for anyone else. It's no good for us. I don't think that's their position. I don't think so. There are all these reports now, B-52s being flown over towards the Middle East. I don't know what they're there for. I don't know. What are we going to do, which is Netanyahu's wet dream of bombing Iran? I mean, and look at his fantasy about Gaza. I mean, I will give Trump this. Biden administration, Blinken, they all knew what the end game was for the genocide in Gaza. It was not a secret, but they just lied about it. I mean, Trump was completely. I mean, that's like, you got to hand it to him that way. He's more honest in that sense, kind of in spite of himself, and then there was just this little thing he sent out. I don't know if you saw, Jimmy, where he was like, it's a cartoon of like the Riviera, and yes. It begins by showing pictures of like Gaza all bombed out, and next thing you know, it looks like Dubai, and there's a golden statue of Trump, and okay, I mean, so yeah, I think Glenn probably didn't do a close read of what I was saying, but I everything he said about empire, of course, I agree with, and I've been saying for a really long time. I just don't think the intent. I don't think the intent of the Trump administration aligns with what he wants, what I want, and what you want. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm proved wrong, but I don't think so.
Do you think there is an ideological commitment or an ideology that Trump has of non-interventionist? I think he's a puppet of Israel. But he's made. Well, he's ending the Ukraine war, which is going to really hurt me because I have a big bit about the Ukraine war in my special, which I just taped last weekend. Uh-oh. So that's horrible. But I wish he could keep that war going at least until July. But but I'll take it. I'll take it on the chin I'll take one for the team. But he is ending that war, and he has talked. At least he's given lip service to being friends with Russia and China. And did you hear when he said he wanted to get together so we could all reduce our military spending by 50%?
Yeah, I mean, no, we spend more money than the next 10 nations combined,
right,
including Russia and China. So it's disproportionately
right.
Look, you and I have long opposed the proxy war in Ukraine. And been very vocal about it. And I think that ending the war is a positive. It's an unwinnable war. It was designed primarily to degrade the Russian military at the expense of Ukraine and Ukrainians and isolate Putin. That's what it was always about, any war of attrition. I mean, the odious Henry Kissinger even said at the beginning of the war, it should be stopped and there should be land for peace. And we won't get into the history of Ukraine and the real, very real campaign against ethnic Russians. That's all real. Not to mention the promise of not expanding NATO beyond the borders of a unified Germany. I was actually there. I heard Hans-Dietrich Genscher, the then German foreign minister, and James Baker say it. So, but of course, what he wants is to align himself with Putin, because I think that authoritarian model is one that he admires and wants to emulate. Trump is just transactional. He wants the rare earth minerals. Now Putin's offered him more rare earth minerals. We've got Jeff Bezos paid $40 million for a puff piece on Melania Trump, of which she gets, I think, $26 million. And now that's not enough, so she's getting corporate sponsors. I mean, it's just completely transactional. He's just a grifter. I don't think he has an ideology particularly. But Project 2025. I mean, they can't put an executive order in front of him fast enough and hand him his Sharpie to sign it. I think he probably has only a vague notion of what he's doing. There are very nefarious ideological elements behind this. And look, I'm trying to get my way through the Project 2025. It's a tough read. I don't know if you've tried to read it, but it's important because And in there they talk about expanding, essentially destroying any kind of diplomatic at the State Department and any kind of diplomacy. And, it's just all about the hammer and expanding the military budget and military presence globally. That's all 2025.
I mean, if that was Donald Trump's real agenda, why would Dick Cheney oppose him? Why would the neocons oppose him? Why would most of the establishment Republican Party be never Trumpers? Why, if that was really his agenda, why would they would exalt him?
Well, I think on that aspect, people like Dick Cheney, in terms of expanding the military footprint, they don't oppose it, but they oppose it on everything else. Essentially that, we didn't get into the deep state. The deep state is real. The deep state is a hostile force towards Trump, without question. We saw the heads of all of the intelligence communities, once they left office, essentially seek to discredit and destroy Trump in terms of this whole fictitious Russian asset stuff and Russian.
So why are they doing? So that I still don't understand. I think it's because he ran as a non-interventionist. He ran on getting us out. That's why they opposed him in 2016, because he said we'll get out of the Middle East. And now he wants to end the Ukraine war and have peace with Russia. I think that's why the neocon. So that seems to be.
I think what the election, when you define the election that took place, it was between corporatists and oligarchs, and they're different. So corporatists want stability because they make long-term investments. They want stable trade deals so they can get all their tax money out of here and import goods without paying tariffs. They want the decorum of an Obama or, Biden. I don't know how much decorum he had, but I mean, so oligarchs are different. Oligarchs want chaos. Oligarchs want to rip down the superstructure. And it's because it's pure rentier economics. They want to create toll booths. That's what the cloud capital, it's what Yanis Varoufakis calls techno-fascism. So that's how, Jeff Bezos, he doesn't really make anything, but if you want to get anything, you got to pay him to get it. And so that oligarchic control is different from capitalist corporate control. The corporatists backed Harris, the Democratic Party. The oligarchs backed Trump, and they want different things. So as we began the show, we talked about private equity firms like KKR. They want to harvest. I mean, Musk wants to all of these. So they've just fired, 5,000 civilian employees and work for the Pentagon, right? I think there's 1 million civilian employees they want to get rid of all of them and just outsource. Everything gets outsourced. They make money off of.
So that's an oligarch agenda.
Yeah, they want to destroy the Department of Education. So everything gets privatized. Everything is going to be privatized.
So that's not that's not. So getting rid of the Federal Department of Education, that's not about putting the money back into the states and having them do it.
No, it's about funding charter schools, quote unquote Christian schools.
But that's what Obama was for too. I mean,
no, I'm not saying, Jimmy, don't get me. I don't like Obama.
No, I'm just saying, but that's a corporatist. I always thought I saw that as a corporatist agenda.
Well, it was all online education. Yeah, but they didn't go to the extreme of wanting to close the Department of Education. I mean, what we're talking about is a kind of, yes, the irony is that the corporatists created the oligarchs. They created these figures by essentially through unregulated capitalism. But there is that tension within capitalism, as there always has been, between corporatists and oligarchs. And now the oligarchs run the show. I mean, you can see they're all Thiel and Musk, and they're having a field day, and they're going to make, money that, we can't even dream of. I mean, so but what they're doing is weakening. They're harvesting the government. Who wrote about this was Karl Marx. He said in the late stage of capitalism, when they can't extract wealth from an immiserated population, they actually extract wealth from the very structures that made them wealthy and destroy it. That's Karl Marx. That's what's happening.
So who is the oligarchs would be people like Jeff Bezos, Zuckerberg, Musk, Larry Fink from Blackwater, right, and Peter Thiel. Those would be the oligarchs. And who would be the corporatists?
Well, they'd be the people who run GM. They'd be people who make things. Okay. The people who actually make things in sweatshops in Monterrey, Mexico. I mean, GM, which moved its plants from Anderson Indiana to Monterey. So all the union jobs are gone. They pay workers in Monterey $3 an hour. They get to drive the trucks back into the United States and sell them to us at the same price, and they make a lot more money. So those are people who deal in physical products, physical goods. Think of oligarchs primarily as people who set up toll booths between you and services you need. That's what the for-profit healthcare industry is. They set up toll booths and they extract massive amounts of profit. They own your utility. They own anything that you need. Which should be a public, part of the public infrastructure. They take over, and of course, what they really love to take over is things we can't live without, which is like healthcare. Nobody chooses to get, cancer or something.
So Jeff Bezos basically created a platform. He didn't create the products that are sold on his platform. He just created that thing, and now he's like a toll booth for you. Every time you buy something, you have to pay a toll. But Musk actually makes things. He made the electric car, which Tesla made him most of his money, and now he makes satellites, and he's a contractor.
Yeah, but where does he get a huge proportion of his money from?
The federal government. Yeah,
he's the biggest parasite there is.
Yeah,
I mean, what does he own? 60% of the satellites? I think that's right.
Yes. Yeah,
60%. And how many of those work for are essentially is the U.S. government paying him to use?
Right. That's right.
And then AI. Don't forget AI. So, those Tesla cars are just iPads on wheels. Everything that you say, every music everywhere you go, all that information is captured and sold. So Musk is in this kind of what Giannis calls techno-fascism, is in deep.
Okay. Do you have any more time? I have one more thing I'd like to talk to you about.
Yeah, sure.
So I was very happy. I was one of those people. I was happy about Kash Patel taking over the FBI, even though he's a horrible Zionist. That seems to be the price of admission into any administration. You have to become a horrible Zionist, and then of course I hear people like you, and it takes away my joy. But here I had Christian Parenti. He wrote this article. It said progressives should cheer Trump's FBI purge. The Bureau bullied anti-war radicals like my father. And he says Trump 2.0 is a battle-hardened and arrives with a wrecking crew and an aggressive plan to dismantle or weaken the key institutions of America's unaccountable security state. He says this is good and necessary. And let me just show you what he said when I had him on the show. This is what he said.
Well, I'm supportive of his going after the FBI because the FBI is out of control for better part of a century. It has targeted primarily the left, including organized labor and all manner of social movements. It's been very destructive. It hasn't just repressed the left. It's also actively engaged in misdirecting and confusing the left. And it's a real problem. It's not just that it's a nuisance, but it is a real threat. It is a cancer within American democracy. So I think this is a very important opportunity to deal with this rogue agency. And many on the left will say, well, they'll just replace it with something worse or as bad. But we don't know that. And also, there's going to be an opening. If they actually dismantle this thing or cripple it or really attack it, that's going to undo all sorts of an institutional legacy, an institutional knowledge, which is unhelpful for democracy and unhelpful for progressive politics. So get rid of it and pressure the government, pressure the Trump administration to make sure that there isn't some recreation of the FBI. Also, it's unrealistic to think that you can recreate almost a century of something overnight. I mean, this is an agency with really serious momentum, a legacy of intimidating and bullying. So that's the kind of abstract reason. And more specifically, as I mentioned in this piece for Unheard, my father, Michael Parenti, was a radical, anti-imperialist peace activist in the 60s and 70s and was targeted by the FBI, not as badly as members of the Black Panthers who were, imprisoned and killed and stuff like that. But my father was beaten up pretty badly by the cops and harassed for a long time by the FBI, got his file, had a thick file. They bothered my mother, So I was raised with these guys being the enemy, not in some abstract sense, but like rather tangibly. So that's why I'm in favor of removing these bullies from our politics, if possible.
So what I share that view. I've had people push back on me saying things like they're just going to replace the old goons with the new goons. Do you agree? What do you say? Do you agree with him or?
I agree with his characterization of the FBI. I mean, the FBI was really created to destroy leftist movements. And I mean, they ruined so many lives, including Billie Holiday's. And they went after jazz singers, if you remember.
Yeah.
No, they were awful. We know from COINTELPRO, and of course, they murdered Fred Hampton and withdrew the FBI protection from Martin Luther King after he denounced the Vietnam War. And both King and Johnson and the FBI knew damn well what that meant, given the plethora of death threats against him. So I agree with his characterization, but I do think they're just replacing the old goons with goons who are going to be loyal to Trump. Nobody's talking about getting rid of the FBI or let's talk about the CIA, which has probably done more damage and across the world. It hardly made us safer. I mean, it's the whole. When I was overseas, I watched in the embassies how it just became the diplomatic corps shrunk, and the ambassadors didn't even know what the CIA station chief was doing in their own country. So even when I covered the war in El Salvador, we got the phone list from the embassy. 60% of the people in the embassy had the same extension. Because it was the CIA, including the deputy director of the Phoenix program. So there's been a long assault against diplomacy and against the diplomatic corps and a militarization within, the diplomatic corps. We got off in the CIA, but I don't see it. I don't think he's going to. I think he's going to bring it to heel because he is not wrong. I'm talking about Trump. He's not wrong in the sense that these institutions actively sought to bring him down. There's no question about that. And anybody who has any doubts about it, as soon as these guys left office, they couldn't be on CNN and MSNBC fast enough. Clapper, remember Clapper?
Yes.
James Clapper. I sued him. I sued him actually in the Supreme Court. But
is that when
Clapper was what?
And how did that turn out?
Well, I and a bunch of journalists sued him because of the belief that we were being surveilled by the NSA, and it was Clapper versus Amnesty International. So I was one of the journalists in the suit, and the federal lawyers got up. This was before Snowden got up in the court and said, if any of these journalists were actually being watched by the government, we would tell them. Yeah, that's the world we live in, Jimmy. And so the Supreme Court said, well, then I guess there's no case.
Just like wasn't it Clapper who said to Congress that they don't gather,
right.
They don't surveil normal America? Well, of course they do. That Edward Snowden proved it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So anyway, that's an aside. But this is still kind of a mystery to me. Then why did the deep state, if Trump is just going to do all those things in Project 2025, why did the deep state oppose him so vehemently? Because they can't, because he's impetuous and they can't control him and he's an embarrassment to the empire. So even in Biden's severe cognitive decline, they could still push him out in front of a teleprompter. I mean, yes, he'd read turn right and stuff like that, and stumble over, words with more than two syllables. And he did what he was told. Obama did what he was told. I mean, they don't trust him to manage the empire, and they're not wrong about that. I mean, he's not a good manager of empire. That's why.
Yeah, meaning. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I mean, destroying AID. AID is weapon. I know because I worked for 20 years in the global South. I watched how AID worked. It is a really dark. The sad thing is that they do have programs for clean water, and I mean it's all transactional in HIV, and I hate to see that go. But on the other hand, it's a dark force, and it is used. It's completely weaponized, and. But that's an example of how they don't know how to manage empire if they want to maintain the empire, and I think they do. I think Trump loves power. He loves being able to wield the big stick.
I think he wants. I mean, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying that, like I told you before, I don't have faith, but I have hope. So I have hope that he actually has an instinct of non-interventionalism, and that he is transactional in a way that's positive, right? It doesn't matter why he wants to make peace with Russia. It only matters that he does. Like I tell people, it didn't matter if Lincoln freed the slaves because he thought it would help him get laid. It doesn't matter what his intention is. It only mattered that he freed the slave. So I'm just hoping, and I have to live with hope. And so I'm hoping that if Trump doesn't go along and start a World War III with Iran, I mean, that would be horrible if he did that. I'm hoping he doesn't do that. It looks like he might.
Yeah, I agree with you that, we rewrite our own history. Lincoln was not actually an abolitionist. He wanted to send the blacks to, I don't know, to Africa or somewhere. And it was really the abolitionists. It was Frederick Douglass and these forces that, the abolitionist movement before the war they were just seen as kind of dreamers. And then, of course, because of the Civil War, Lincoln's hand was forced. So yeah, you're right about intent. I feel that way on Ukraine. I just want the thing to stop. I don't, if he wants to go, have dinner with Putin and, join the dictator club, fine. I think that probably is his motive. I just thought the war in Ukraine was insane from the start, and long opposed it. So you're right about that in terms of that particular issue, but I think his overall intent, and again, we will see. Time will show. I think his overall intent is not to do what Christian Parente, who I also love and think is great, and you and I want, which is dismantle empire, dismantle these organs of internal security, like end the wholesale surveillance. Restore civil liberties, deconstruct the carcel state. We didn't even talk about that. 2.3 million Americans, 40% of whom have never been charged with physically harming another human being. I mean, it's insane. And of course, it's just a form of social control for the poor, particularly the urban poor. So I don't think that there is that intent to restructure the society. On particular issues like Ukraine, that's a plus. But I wouldn't extrapolate that to say that he's going to restructure society in the way that it needs to, or he is going to dismantle empire. But again, that's conjecture. I never met Trump. I don't know many of the people around him. I know Tulsi Gabbard. That's about it. So I don't know.
Well, okay. Well, I'm going to have hope.
Well, you know what Johnson said about, he said, when you get divorced and remarried, it's the triumph of hope over experience.
Well, listen, I'm sure the animals thank you for being a vegan if they could. So that's a great thing. I really appreciate you coming on and being generous with your time. And I always look forward to talking with you. Everybody should check out Chris Hedges' Substack. Doing great work. He's all self-contained now. This guy doesn't have any sugar daddies.
No, you told me to do this years ago. So.
It's working out for you.
Yeah, it is. But they forced me to follow your advice.
Yeah, I know. Anyway, did they ever crack into your phone? They used Pegasus to get into my phone, my computer, and my iCloud.
Oh, I asked Bill Binney if he, Bill Binney wrote Trailblazer, and then of course blew the whistle because he wanted it to be used for wholesale surveillance of potential terrorists, and of course they used it for all of us.
Yes.
I asked Binney if he encrypted, and he started laughing, and he said no, and he said, "Let me tell you." Not only do they follow, but in real time they follow a few thousand people, and you're probably on the list. So,
yeah, it's. I know. There's no getting out of it. Okay, all right, Chris Hedges. Thanks again. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Jimmy. Keep up the great work.
Right back at you. Come see us on tour. We're going to be in Baltimore, Hartford, Connecticut, Syracuse, Atlantic City, Levittown, New York, Cohoes, New York, and Providence, Rhode Island. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.